"Old man," cried the fellow passing near, "you are wasting your strength with planting here. Your journey will end with the ending day, and you never again will pass this way. You have crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why plant a tree at eventide?" The planter raised his old gray head. "Good friend, on the path I have come," he said, "there followeth after me today a youth whose feet will pass this way. He has not come to the twilight dim. Good friend, I am planting a tree for him."
Hello, my name is Leo Bird. I'm a tree farmer. My home is on Dibble Creek, a short distance north of Stockton, Kansas. This black walnut tree was planted as a seedling in the spring of 1976, the year in which I began to experience both the joys and the frustrations of tree farming. Growing trees has been a rewarding avocation, not in terms of short-term profitability or instant gratification, but rather in terms of continued personal pleasure. The purpose of this video is to share some of it with you. As we begin the journey, I would ask you to bear in mind that this is not intended to be a technical or textbook presentation, but is offered as an illustration of some of the practices employed by one who enjoys growing trees, which I have come to believe is an art as well as a science. Although our focus will be on black walnut tree farming, most of the information presented here is applicable to other nut-bearing hardwood trees such as pecan and oak. Just as the life of a baby chick begins inside an egg, the life of a tree begins inside a nut. It follows then that if we want to grow trees, we will need some nuts. Gathering them is an activity designed to take place in early fall when they have matured and begin falling from the trees. Otherwise, the squirrels and other rodents will get first choice. Nuts destined for planting should be selected carefully. Only those produced by trees which have exhibited hardiness, good growth rates, and are pleasing in appearance and conformation should be chosen for use as nut seeds, such as this tree. Now, black walnuts produced by inferior trees are best used in cookies and ice cream. This is a cookies and ice cream tree. Young and old alike can find pleasure in the nut gathering activity. And it is today's children who can look forward to a lifetime of enjoyment of both the tangible and the intangible rewards to be found in growing trees. Those of us who are planting seeds during twilight or retirement years can hope only to pass on to other generations our devotion to stewardship of the land and the trees we place upon it. After gathering the nuts, the next step is to remove the husks, that outer covering which begins to soften and to darken several days before the nuts mature and begin falling from the trees. Now, some of those are completely black, some of them are still in the process of getting darker. Now, some basic equipment is absolutely essential. A good pair of gloves, either rubber or leather, a pocket knife, and a pair of old boots. Now, the gloves will protect the hands against cuts and unsightly stains, and will also protect from chemicals in the husks which can cause skin irritation and blisters. Now, the boots are for stomping the nuts to make the husk removal easier, and the knife is for the stubborn husks. Now, I'll just take a couple of minutes and demonstrate the stomping and the husk removal. Don't worry about breaking the nuts. You won't break them by stomping on them. Most of them come off quite easily. Just takes a little, maybe a little bit of a pinch. Pull them apart. It's a rather pleasant activity, especially on a nice fall day like this. Now, these de-husked nuts are now placed in a hail screen container, safe from pilferage by rodents such as squirrels and rats, and then they'll be placed in the basement or a cellar where they be kept cool until about the 1st of November, when they'll be the subject of another operation. Now, these containers are easily made from hail screen available at most lumber yards and hardware stores. Now, I prefer to make them the size about 10 by 15 by 3 inches deep, but there certainly is no magic in those dimensions. You can make them any size you wish. But the one thing I would suggest is that you be sure to wear a pair of gloves while you're working with the hail screen. Today is November 5th. I am standing beside a pit or trench about 15 inches deep and long enough and wide enough to accommodate 7 hail screen containers of nut seeds, 3 each of black walnut and bur oak and 1 of red oak. Now, choosing a location with a slight slope and an unshaded southern exposure is recommended because the site needs to be well drained and receive full sun. The storage of nuts for an extended period of time for the purpose of causing them to break dormancy and to germinate is called stratification. The process takes several months. We will know if our efforts to spark germination have been successful when we unearth our treasure next April. After placing the containers in the pit, we cover them with a layer of sand, which is then watered down. This serves a dual purpose. The sand will fill the air pockets and help to hold moisture around the nuts. A moist environment, together with cool and relatively constant temperature, is critical to germination of nut seeds. The second reason for using sand is a practical one. It washes off of the nuts much easier than sticky soil when we remove the containers from the pit. We now simply fill the pit with soil, firming as we fill, and then we heap a little extra on the top to compensate for settling. Don't depend upon memory or the soil surface appearance to provide the exact location of the pit next spring. Instead, place steel rods or sturdy wooden stakes at both ends. Now, just walk away and hope that Mother Nature will perform her magic. Of all of the subjects which become topics of tree farming conversations, none are more often discussed than pruning. Perhaps that is indicative of its importance. While time will not permit an in-depth seminar on pruning, we will offer a few basic guidelines and then proceed to demonstrate some of the generally accepted practices. The purpose of pruning is twofold: to encourage a tree to produce a desirable saw log and to do it in the shortest possible time. It has been said that the time to prune is when the saw is sharp. However, most tree farmers agree that the proper time to do major pruning is late in the dormant season, in February and March. Minor new growth corrective pruning in the upper portion of the main stem may be done in June or early July. The worst time to prune is midsummer to late summer. However, damage by machinery, animals, or wind should be attended promptly after it occurs. Pruning is an ongoing process and should be practiced year to year. Uncorrected, undesirable growth can result in total loss of potential timber value. At the same time, care must be taken to prune no more than is absolutely necessary to achieve the desired result. Patience is a virtue when it comes to pruning. My own philosophy might be simply stated: when in doubt, don't cut. Never prune more than 1/3 of the leaf and limb area in any given year, and do not remove side branches from more than half the height of the tree. When pruning cannot correct problem growth or excessive damage, we may find it necessary to resort to an extreme measure called coppicing, which is cutting off the stem a few inches above the ground. Coppicing is most effective for trees under 4 inches in diameter. From the several sprouts, that is new growth, which grow from the stump, all but the most desirable one should be removed, about half of them the first year and the balance in the following year or two. Some trees seem to delight in frustrating a tree farmer and refuse to respond to corrective measures. These can best serve mankind as a flame in the fireplace or as a rest area and meal site for wildlife. There are 3 basic tools that we use in the pruning process. One, of course, a pruning saw, some long-handled pruning shears, and some handheld clippers. Now there is one other piece of equipment that is used for some heavy pruning, and that of course is a chainsaw. But a chainsaw should never be used except when the operator is qualified to use one and when all of the safety precautions are followed. Now, in pruning this branch, there are three things we want to keep in mind about where to prune it. We don't want to prune out here an inch or so away from the trunk, nor do we want to cut right along the edge of the trunk and actually cut some of the trunk off, but instead we want to cut off right about at the branch collar. And this then will leave a minimal pruning wound. And now one of the other things that we need to do on the larger branches is to make a small cut through the bark so that we don't tear the bark when that branch falls. I about forgot to do that. Now you can see here, these branches were removed last year, and by the end of this growing season they will probably be pretty well healed, just like this one. This, I'm sure, is in its, will finish healing this year. This will be its third year. Another thing I might point out here is that what appears to be a lump here actually is an old pruning wound that's all healed, and in time this will all fill in and one will never know that there's an old pruning wound there. Now, as soon as we remove this branch using the same procedure, we'll be through. We won't prune any more on this tree this year. Okay, now for pruning on this tree this year, we can certainly remove some of these bottom smaller branches and probably leave these medium-sized ones, and probably remove these two larger ones. We'll still have our tree in balance, and we won't have taken off more than a third of the leaf and limb area, and we won't have removed more than 50% of the branches from the height of the tree. Now here again is an example of healing pruning wounds that are doing a nice job of healing. By the end of this season, they'll be nearly closed. Next year, they'll be almost invisible. Now, as you can see, some rather severe pruning was done on this tree last year. Fairly large branch on this side and one over on this side. So this year, really all we would do is remove these two branches and take off these small branches up to this area here. What we're trying to do is get at least 9 feet of straight trunk, or bole, B-O-L-E, you call it. So, and this one is well on its way. Then the next thing you'd hope to get is 18 feet, but anything above 9 is going to be great, but you sure want to try to get 9 feet. But you can't do that all in a year's time. It takes a period of several years to get that much pruning accomplished. Okay. Now, we talked a little bit about the coppicing earlier, and so we'll demonstrate what we do. That's pretty simple. You just simply cut it off. But anyway, this is never going to make a good tree. That's obvious, and it's been broken here, and this has pretty slim chance of ever making a main stem. So in the long run, we'll be a whole lot better off just to start afresh. You want to cut that down about as close to the ground as you can. With a little bit of slope on the cut. And we'll have some new sprouts on that this spring, and we'll be amazed in 2 or 3 years' time what kind of a new tree we have. This tree may not look like it right now, but in time it's going to be a good tree, but it needs some help. Now, the only thing we'll do is, this is a fairly heavy proportion of the tree, but it needs to be removed, and that's all we'll take off this year. Now there we'll make a kind of an angle cut, angling with it down kind of from inside to outside. Nice clean cut. Now we have pretty good balance along the stem, and that's all we'll do for this year. Now we're going to prune these sprouts off. It's time for them to come off. Now, we don't want the competition right here, so we'll remove some of it. Here again, we stay away from that trunk just a little ways by that branch collar. Get a good clean cut. Now, these 2 branches here will help train this one, and its natural inclination then will be to move over here, and that tree will straighten up. Now here's an example of the growth that can occur after we've coppiced. Now this would be probably from 2 years ago that we coppiced it, but we have nice, clean, straight growth. And it's all being, the trees are still all on the same system, so all we're going to do is just remove that branch for this year, and it wouldn't hurt anything to take that little one off. So we have good tree balance. We'll have plenty of time to remove those other branches. Here's another example of a tree that was coppiced, and we can be assured that this was from last year. So right there's the old stump. Now, we don't want to take all this off this year, so really all we need to do is just to take this one off. We do that. This one appears to be about the best. We still have some growth here and some growth here that will kind of help train it to come straight up. And in addition to that, if you have a choice, you're better off to have the tree so that the southwest summertime wind can help it to grow in the best position. So that's all we'll do for that one this year. Now these are the kind that are really fun to prune because there aren't many decisions to make. Really, we have nice balance on both sides of the main stem, with the one exception, we can prune this little branch off. We have a two here, we have a little trainer here, and there's really, this one could come off, but it might just as well wait till next year. We have a nice tree in the making. The seedlings that you see growing on this particular location were planted as nut seeds in the spring of 1991 and have had 2 full growing seasons. This planting consists of bur oak, pecan, and black walnut. Now, immediately after we planted the nut seeds, we installed on all of the oak and pecan and on part of the black walnut what is called a tree shelter. Now, tree shelters, I think, are a valuable tool to be used by a tree farmer for 2 reasons. Number one, they provide a greenhouse-like environment for the young seedling and also protect it from severe weather. Number two, and perhaps more importantly, it prevents cropping by deer and rodents and rabbits. Now, there are various kinds and styles on the market, and information about them can be obtained from area foresters or extension offices or from professional foresters. So I would invite you to check it out. Now, here's another one that is fairly easy to prune. We'll nip off this little branch. And those 2 are fairly well balanced. We'll leave them, take these 2 off. And you might think to take this off, but this tree still needs to move a little bit that direction, so we'll leave this on as a little bit of a trainer. Now, this tree, that's very questionable, and sometimes you just have to grit your teeth and do it, but I think we're going to be a lot better off in the long run if we just go ahead and coppice that, and next year we'll deal with the new growth. That hurts to do that. Now, this is a pecan, and pecan starts slower than the black walnut and even slower than the bur oak. But this is dead right here, so we'll nip it off. That's all we'll do. But here again about the tree shelters, that would have been a candidate for cropping by some kind of wildlife. Okay, now here's an example of the bur oak, how nicely that's grown, and of course it doesn't need any pruning at all, but it's in the process of making a beautiful tree. If you question the real value and importance of pruning, you might want to take a look at some trees that haven't had any care, haven't had any pruning, that are growing too close together, because most of them won't do it completely on their own, and the ones that don't receive care and pruning will end up as firewood and not as a marketable saw log. It is now the middle of April. Although our stratification pit site was well drained on the surface, we did not anticipate the elevated water table which resulted from the spring melting of last winter's heavy accumulation of snow. As we removed the bottom few inches of soil from the pit, standing water took its place. We have removed 6 of the containers from the pit and will now remove the 7th and last. At this point, we can only be hopeful that the stratification effort was successful and that the nut seeds will not have been adversely affected by excessive moisture. As you have just seen, unexpected occurrences keep tree farming from becoming routine and uneventful. Now what we're doing is, this illustrates why I use the sand. One reason that we use the sand is because it makes the cleaning a whole lot easier. Now generally the black walnut are a little bit slower to germinate, but hopefully we haven't ruined them. Okay, that operation is completed. Okay, now here are a few of the bur oak acorns that I've removed from one of the containers. And these, I'm happy to say, are starting to germinate. You can just barely see where the radicle on this one is beginning to protrude, and that will be the root. When this nut begins to grow, the root will go down first before we ever see the sprout at the top of the ground. The next step is to place the nuts in a bucket of water and remove those which float. Most of the floaters will not germinate. Although we see little evidence of germination, we are encouraged because there were only a few floaters. Because we are unable to plant the nut seeds immediately, they need to be properly stored. After the nuts are drained, they are placed in a plastic ice bag with a piece of moist towel and stored in a cool location, about 50 to 55 degrees. They can be kept for a week or two before planting. Germination should continue during this period. Site selection is of paramount importance to successful tree farming. Here again, professional assistance is suggested, especially if land is being purchased for the purpose of planting trees. Retired Kansas forester Fred Atchison gave me my first piece of advice about planting black walnut trees. He said simply, "Leo, plant them on the best land you have." Now that we know where we're going to plant trees, what comes next? We call it site preparation. What we have to do depends on the condition of the site, of course. But, to put it simply, we must do whatever is necessary to free it of cultivation obstacles such as tree stumps or fences. Then we will want it cleanly cultivated and free of weeds, grass, or crop residue. All of this should be accomplished in the fall of the year. Then, just prior to planting time in the spring, one cultivation operation should eliminate the new growth of weeds which always accompany spring. As illustrated in these diagrams, sizes and shapes of planting sites do vary. However, in all cases, it is critical that some guidelines be observed. Number one, planting rows should be straight and trees evenly spaced in the rows. And number two, although it is tempting to plant close to fences or property lines, adequate space should be left around the perimeter for both vehicle access and tillage equipment turnaround. It is extremely critical that we plant trees in such a manner that we can use our equipment most effectively and efficiently. Otherwise, the task of controlling weeds becomes so monumental that neglect may be the result. Our efforts at stratification were at least reasonably successful. Some black walnut and many of the bur oak have germinated. Last year, the red oak outperformed both the black walnut and the bur oak in germination, but at this point, the reverse appears to be true. A close-up view of the black walnut and bur oak shows the radicle emerging. This is the root, and it will grow several inches in length before sprouting occurs and the stem becomes visible. It is now the 1st of May, and the nut seeds need to be planted. We usually plant in April, but weather conditions dictated a delay this year. Having underestimated the number of nut seeds needed, we will plant only 2 ungerminated nuts per planting hole instead of the usual 3. Of course, those which have germinated will be planted 1 per hole. Using 12-foot spacings, this site of less than 2 acres will accommodate 500 seedlings. The most difficult part of the planting is the site layout. A 300-foot tape marked in 1-foot increments is recommended. Again, it pays to be as precise as possible, starting with square corners. I have made it a practice to plant nut seeds just an inch or so on the north side of the flag. It is helpful during the early stages of growth and cultivation to know where to look for the emerging sprout. No special tools are required for planting. Simply place the seed or seeds at a depth of about 2 inches, cover, and firm the soil. If you are using tree shelters, they can be placed over the seeds immediately after planting. Hopefully, our efforts will be rewarded in a couple of weeks when sprouting begins to occur. One of the pleasures of growing trees from nut seeds can be found in the process of sharing the experience with others. One way to do this is to grow seedlings in 32-ounce biodegradable soft drink cups. The procedure is quite simple. Cut 2 slits in the bottom of the container. Then, being careful not to damage the radicle, place a germinated nut about an inch deep in the container, which has been partially filled with a mixture of equal parts of potting soil and garden soil. Finish filling and lightly firm. Add water and place the container indoors, where it will need to be watered occasionally. After sprouting occurs and leaves develop, the seedling can be delivered to a friend or relative for planting in a permanent location. To plant the seedling, dig a hole the same depth as the cup and somewhat larger in diameter. Slit the cup vertically in 3 or 4 places and remove the bottom. Then, gently place it in the planting hole and firm the soil around it. Water thoroughly and place a tree shelter or wire cage around the seedling for protection. In spite of some unusually adverse weather conditions, most of the black walnut and bur oak nut seeds that we planted this spring are now established seedlings and doing quite well. The red oak, I am sorry to report, did not germinate, and none of them were planted. Near the end of this growing season, we will remove the flags from the live seedlings, and the others will serve as markers when we do the replanting next spring. Especially during the first growing season, Seedlings are not well equipped to compete with weeds and grasses for nutrients, sunshine, and moisture. Therefore, cultivation is essential. Now, most of this can be accomplished from the seat of a tractor, but the job must be completed with the use of good old-fashioned hand tools like this garden hoe. It may not be pretty, but it's effective. As we conclude the recording of some of the activities which take place during a year of tree farming, we'll say goodbye from the same place where we said hello 10 months ago. Having addressed tree farming in terms of fundamental practices, it is our hope that those demonstrated and discussed will be of some benefit to others who do or will find fulfillment in the tree growing experience. For most of us, the rewards for time and effort invested in growing trees will not be the kind which can be deposited in the bank account. Rather, they are more likely to be received in the form of intangible dividends. For example, I frequently take a walk after the evening meal. In the place I walk, there are no traffic lights or busy thoroughfares. Instead, there are winding trails, only faintly visible, not made by the feet of man. There are no screaming tires or automobile horns. Instead, there are the sounds of rustling leaves, both overhead and underfoot, new ones from this year and old ones from last. There are no bricks precisely stacked one upon the other, no great pieces of steel or concrete, monuments to man shaped in harsh designs of rectangles and triangles. Rather, there are a multitude of exquisite little patterns, each unique and different. There are no foul odors. The air is clean. I encounter no hostilities on these leisurely journeys, nor do I find myself absorbed in the pursuit of negative thoughts or engaged in sorting priorities. To do so would be to focus on the ugly in the midst of the beautiful. This place to which I refer is not where I go to escape reality. I go there to sense and to feel reality. It is there, in the woods, in solitude, that I find it.
"Old man," cried the fellow passing near, "you are wasting your strength with planting here. Your journey will end with the ending day. and you never again will pass this way. You have crossed the chasm deep and wide.